I'd like to formally welcome you all to tonight's program. My name is Butch Farabee. I'm a board member of Old Pueblo Archaeology Center for about the 5 or 6 years, it being my honor to do so. Tonight's program, Third Thursday program, is Dr. Chip Wills, and Old Pueblo's delighted to welcome him. I just met him a couple of days ago, so I'm going to have to read my introduction, and hopefully Dr. Wills will excuse me for doing this. But he has a doctorate in anthropology from the University of Michigan in 1985, and then joined the University of New Mexico the following year, Department of Anthropology, where he is now professor of anthropology and the Regents lecturer. Since '78, he also was employed as an archaeologist, researcher, teaching assistant, adjunct lecturer, and visiting professor for the National Park Service's Chaco Center, the NPS Division of Remote Sensing, University of Michigan, University of Virginia, the Southern Illinois University Center for Archaeological Investigations. Chip, I'm getting tired of just reading all your credentials.
You can stop then.
No, the National Museum of Natural History and University of New Mexico's Maxwell Museum of Anthropology. He's the author of a book, Early Prehistoric Agriculture in the American Southwest, and co-editor with Robert Leonard of The Ancient Southwestern Community, Models and Methods for the Study of Prehistoric Social Organizations. He's written and co-authored 28 articles and refereed professional journals well, let me stop right there. I'm getting tongue-tied as I say this. He's received numerous national and international awards and fellowships. And he's also told Al and I the other day when we first met, that I first met him, of a sort of an interesting little anecdote from Chaco when he was up there. And it has to do with the sensing and boulders and what have you. So, Chip, if you don't mind relating that for us.
Well, maybe I could do it at the end.
Okay, that's fair enough. So anyway, okay, again, please welcome for Third Thursday's Food for Thought program, Dr. Chip Wills. And with that, I'm going to sign off on this. Thank you, Doctor.
So Al, I'm going to go to share screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you see it?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, good. Well, I'll just stop me if you can't hear me, or send a message or something. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Butch. Thank all of you for the invitation to be here tonight. Tucson's one of my favorite places and one of my wife, Patty Crown's, favorite places, and it's really nice to join you. I'm going to talk about the relationship between this place, Chaco Canyon, which is a national park, and the University of New Mexico in a historical way. And I'm going to do it in two parts. One, we're going to sort of the early history, and then some more recent work. I'm not going to try to explain Chaco Canyon. That is beyond my wildest imagination. And there are I have colleagues who are perfectly happy to do that, and you probably talked to them or they've talked to you in the past. So what I want to do is go ahead and just jump right in and try not to bore you too much as we go through this. This is part one. First, I know that many of you have been to Chaco Canyon. Many of you probably consider it one of your favorite places in the world. And maybe some of you haven't. But so I'll just do this really very brief introduction, which is that it is a national park which was founded in 1907 in order to preserve and share the archaeological history of this place with the American public. The focus in the park has always been on a period that is archaeologists call the Bonito phase, from around 800 to 1200 AD, and especially the 11th century or in the 1000s, when a number of very large buildings that are called great houses, they're masonry buildings, were built. The iconic one, the one that you probably maybe all been to or certainly seen or heard about, is Pueblo Bonito, which you see on the right, and an interior view on the left. Over 600 rooms, multi-storied architecture, just an unprecedented architectural achievement in the Southwest at this point in time. So that's where it is in Northwest New Mexico, Mesa Verde for reference up here. And I'm just going to start with this slide, part of which I actually can't see, but I'm going to assume that you can see all of it. This is from the March 1939 University of New Mexico Board of Regents minutes, a meeting from their minutes. And as you can see, I hope, because I can't, in the top line, that this part of the minutes of the regents was devoted to a discussion about transferring university property in what is or was Chaco Canyon National Monument to the National Park Service. And the long story here, and it's a long, complicated political story, is that when the National Monument was established in 1907, it included lots of parcels of private land within the boundaries of the monument. And over time, the university, through the efforts of one individual, was able to acquire approximately 6 square miles of what is now the national park. In 1939, the regents were in discussions about exchanging the university property and land, which included many archaeological sites, to the National Park Service, and an effort that had been initiated by the National Park Service. So this is a part of the history that you probably won't hear when you go to the park. You'll hear a lot of interesting things, but you may not hear about this early relationship between UNM and the National Park Service. And that's what part one here is going to be about. So this effort, or rather this historical relationship, began with this individual, Edgar Lee Hewitt, one of the founding, most influential people in New Mexico archaeology, southwestern archaeology, in the early part of the 20th century. Hewitt, as you can see here in this plaque, was the first director of the School for American Research and of the Museum of New Mexico. He was also the first chairman of the anthropology department at UNM in 1929, and the first director and founder of the Museum of Man in San Diego. And for reference here, or for scope, he had these positions all at the same time. And if you imagine that this is in an age before cell phones, telephones even, really, in many cases, and certainly the internet, an amazing organizational accomplishment. UNM and the School for American Research are going to be important partners and collaborators here in this early history of research at Chaco Canyon. Hewitt came to the Southwest from the Midwest and took a teaching position at what was then New Mexico Normal University in Las Vegas, New Mexico, now New Mexico Highlands University. He didn't come as an anthropologist or an archaeologist or a historian. He came as an educator. And he came with some very innovative ideas for the time, which was that students should get out of the classroom, they should get out into the real world, and they should see things. They should do what we today would call experiential education. And men and women should do this together. This is a photograph from a biology field class at the time that he was teaching in Las Vegas. For this innovative approach to education, Hewitt got fired. And after he got fired, he was able to devote more of his time and interest to what we would now think of as his heritage conservation, preservation, better understanding of the sort of the archaeological history of the Southwest. And he became concerned in the 1890s as a sort of a person who was influential in Santa Fe political circles with what was happening in Chaco Canyon before it became a national monument. And he was especially concerned about this project You see a photograph here, excavations that began in the 1890s that were sponsored by a Hyde Foundation or a Hyde family out of New York and associated with the American Museum of Natural History. This is horrendous. This is pillaging. It's not archaeological work as we would recognize it today. And even at the time, there was concern among many people that what was happening here was a travesty. And Hewitt went to work using his political connections and became involved with a group that was influential in the creation of the Antiquities Act in 1906, signed by Theodore Roosevelt. In 1907, Chaco Canyon will become a national monument by declaration. So Hewitt, this is at the turn of the 20th century, is actively engaged politically in creating a national park, national monument around Chaco and archaeology, and is using his influence that way. Subsequently, he will become involved in archaeology in what is now Bandelier National Monument in Frijoles Canyon. This is a photograph from 1916. And what he was doing explicitly was developing formal field training in archaeology. He wanted students to not just haphazardly go about digging up archaeological sites, but to really understand that what they should be doing would be what we would call today's best practices, that there would be questions that they were trying to answer, and that they would be doing and learning how to do this in a systematic way. There are a number of famous Southwestern archaeologists in this photograph, but I'm only going to point out one who's standing right behind. This is Edgar Lee Hewitt. Standing behind him is a young Neil Judd. And Neil Judd will become influential in Chacoan archaeology about 14 years, well, about 4 years later, actually, after this photograph is taken. So the way that Hewitt becomes involved in Chacoan research after being influential in creating the national monument is this acquisition of private parcels of land by the School of American Research. And eventually that will be shared jointly with the University of New Mexico. And one of the sites that at least partially became part of SAR holdings was the Great House of Chetraquetl, which is very close to Pueblo Bonito. And many of you have probably been there, and you've probably seen this feature in the foreground, in the lower right, which is the Great Kiva. On the left is the excavation of the Great Kiva. In 1921, Hewitt attempted to start a field program involving a field school through SAR at Chaco, but that didn't work out because of conflict with a project at Pueblo Bonito, a second large excavation directed by Neil Judd, Hewitt's former student, with funding from the National Geographic Society and other backing of other Eastern institutions. It's a long and complicated story. James Sneed has written a book about it that which is just really good. But the point here is that Hewitt backed away in 1921 and said, I'm going to wait, or he said, we will wait until the National Geographic Society is finished at Pueblo Bonito to continue work. And that's what happened starting in 1929, at the same time that Hewitt became the chair, the first chair of the anthropology department at UNM. And this effort that will now take place under Hewitt will be, for about 20 years, a joint university and SAR project in the National Monument. So the first field schools, and this is the 1931 one at UNM, the first UNM field schools in Chaco were rustic. This is the field camp. These are 8-week sessions that was set up behind what is Pueblo Bonito in roughly the same area as the earliest excavation projects had been set up in the 1890s. So this is how the field schools started. Students were living in these tents, instructors were living in these tents. It was an adventure for students who were coming from all over the country. But it was not a situation that was ideally conducive to the kind of field training, formal field training that Hewitt had imagined going forward. And so Hewitt raised money to build a field station in Chaco on university property. And this is the building that was built as the main center. It was referred to as the Chaco Canyon Research Center, and it was self-contained. It had its own water system, its own well, a garage that you see and shop here in the foreground. This is the library lecture hall. A full-time nurse was always in residence. Doctors would be there with their families periodically over the course of the field schools as a sort of a family vacation. And in addition to this main facility, which would be very nice to have today if it still existed, were buildings that were set aside for the students. So this is the main building that you see here. It was designed by John Gaumim, a famous archaeologist, architect in the Santa Fe, Albuquerque area. These round structures behind this building were for students. Women were on the left side and men were on the right side. These buildings were designed to look like, and they were built by, Navajos that lived in the canyon. Navajo families lived in the canyon until 1952 when the Park Service encouraged them to leave. So these are student houses along the back, and then there's the main research center here, which had dining halls, kitchen, lecture hall, library, and so on. This is directly across south of Pueblo Bonito on the south side of the canyon. I don't know if there's any connection, but the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, who many of you are familiar with in Southwest Colorado, had a similar sort of design when it started with a sort of Pueblo-style building and then Navajo-style hogans for students and visitors in the background. So, so it's sort of the same kind of idea. The interior of these student buildings was really nice. Flagstone floors, corbelled buildings that were built from pine beams that were brought in from mountains about 50 miles away. And this is where the students were staying. This is a photograph taken just before World War II in 1940. And again, there are a number of famous Southwestern archaeologists who are here as students. Some of you may know, especially Bertha Dutton, who is sitting here in the front and would be a leading pioneer archaeologist in the Santa Fe area. Next to her is a student named John Corbett. And John Corbett will have an immense role in Chacoan archaeology in the 1960s because he will have by that point become the chief archaeologist for the National Park Service. Right? That's a backup. Okay, so this project or this series of field schools were run as very systematic educational experiences. Students attended lectures daily. They attended labs in the evenings, and they conducted archaeological field work under the direction and supervision of senior archaeologists, faculty members, not just at the University of New Mexico, but at other schools who were brought in. Okay? And so this is a one day in the field where they're actually seeing the demonstration of some excavation techniques. The excavations, this is an excavation of a small site near Casa Rinconada, Great Kiva. Pueblo Bonito is on the north side of the wash over here. For reference, many of you have probably been by these small sites on the south side of the canyon. These are very systematic archaeological efforts that were designed to elucidate as carefully as possible the history of the use and occupation of these buildings. And so this is sometimes the field schools get a reputation for not being as careful as maybe some other excavations. This is not the case here. These students were closely supervised, and they were engaged in very systematic problem-oriented work in that they were trying to understand, even with the small sites, how they were, when they were first formed and how they may have changed over time. So this is a photograph showing students who were excavating in a midden area next to a site, an area where there's a lot of refuge. And again, This is a highly controlled excavation with instruments that are there to guarantee that there's a fairly good three-dimensional control over the work that has taken place. I love this photograph because it's the first week of field school. These kids are really happy, but also because it shows us these students have come from all over the United States. They've gotten on trains in Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles, and wound up in Grants or near Grants, New Mexico, or Gallup, New Mexico, at a train stop where they would be picked up in something looking like a car and driven out to Chaco. And it's not like, if you think it's hard to get to Chaco today, and many people do, in 1931, there are no paved roads in New Mexico. This is all dirt and mud to get into the case. But the students are excited. They're glad to be there. And one of the things that they did routinely was, at the end of a field school, students would write up their sort of experiences, and it would be published in the journal called El Palacio, produced by the Museum of New Mexico. And one of the issues, the students, in addition to sometimes having songs and poems that they write, drew pictures of their experience. And so I'm going to share a few of these with you. This is a little drawing that represents preparation. And you can see here, they're all prepared to go for their field session. Before I go any further, I want to contrast this with the National Geographic Society's project at Pueblo Bonito a few years before, where these guys, and I want to emphasize compared to this group, that these are all guys. They don't look happy at all. Right? They don't look like they're having any fun. Students are, you've probably worked with students, and many of you have been a student, I suspect, often have a different kind of perspective on things. They're enjoying themselves. So here's a drawing that represents destination. And I guess this has probably happened to many of you as well. If you've gone to Chaco, your destination involves a flat tire. This is perspiration. And I cannot believe that there's actually a photograph from the field school which fits with this particular drawing, but there is one here. What is also interesting about this photograph is that they're using screens. That is, they are sifting through the material which is coming out of the ground, and they are sorting it into bags by types of material. This is an approach which is good best practices today, but wasn't even common in large parts of the Southwest, including Chaco Canyon, into the 1970s. So this is actually very good work. They had a little drawing here that represents relaxation. Again, I've never been on an archaeological site that had a wheelbarrow that wasn't used this way. There are two purposes in a wheelbarrow. One is to move dirt and stuff around. The other is to relax in. Maybe some of you have done that as well. This is cogitation. And if you look down in the lower left, you'll see that the cogitation involves an ice cream cone, something that they didn't see in Chaco. This photograph is just taken in 1931 in the Great Kiva at Chetraketl. These are 5 of the students, and they are reading an issue, and I don't know how good your eyes are, the Saturday Evening Post. And when I first saw this photograph, I thought, well, 1931 Saturday Evening Post, I can go online and I'll bet I can find a cover, and that's it. And so again, another way in which wheelbarrows are used for things besides just moving dirt around. Water is scarce in Chaco, and you know that if you've been there. It was scarce for the field school, and this is the second photograph I'm showing you of the way that people wash their hair, minimizing the use of water, and developing this sort of communal experience with personal hygiene, I guess. Water is also a problem when it's too much. And I'll talk to you a little bit, or bring that up a little bit in a few more detail here in a few minutes. So these are field school students experiencing a lesson, we call it a field lesson, which is do not drive a truck or anything else into a flowing wash that is mostly mud. Somebody did, and it presumably wasn't them, but you can see the sort of despair here trying to get this out. What you should do is what they did every Sunday, which is to get in an old Ford and go on field visits of sites around in the canyon. And they got and the photograph is proof. They got dressed up to do this. And they got dressed up. Some of them wore high heels or something like high heels. And again, they're just having the time of their lives. And many of them will go on to become professional archaeologists. Above Pueblo Bonito is a very large water hole. And the students used it as a swimming pool. So when they had time and when they could do it, they would go up to this place, which you used to be able to walk up to freely, but you can't anymore, and use it as a swimming pool. I didn't get permission to show you this, but I'm going to anyway, because I don't think that Janet would mind. She and her sister, Margaret Woods, have a very important role to play in Santa Fe archaeology later, much later when they are adults. But I wanted to show you just how serious this field school was. This is from 1931. This is her grade for class 201A, archaeology and anthropology. One of the things about the field school is that anthropologists were involved in coming out and giving lectures to students, many of them biological anthropologists. It was not just about sort of the archaeology of Chaco. It was considered to be a regular university course. Yeah. Some of the sites that were excavated that you've probably been to or can go to if you go to Chaco. I'll go back. No, I won't go back. And one of the earliest projects was the excavation of this great kiva called Casa Rinconada, which is a gathering point every year during the summer solstice. Some of you may have participated in that. Below is what you see today. This is what you would see in 1931 during the first phases of excavation. Most of the walls had collapsed. Archaeologists don't actually know where the tops of the walls stopped. And in many cases, they don't know what was in these parts of the walls that have fallen in. And you can see that today, the lighter colored areas are the sections that have been repaired. It is constantly maintained today. But what you see today is a much cleaner version than what was there when the field school first worked there. In 1934, there was work done at a site called King Quetzal. If you've been to Chaco and you've been up on the loop trail to see the overlook at Pueblo Bonito or go to Pueblo Alto, the head of the trail is here at King Quetzal. So this is the first work there. This was also a site that was on university property at the time. Students, some of the students were engaged in surveying, what we would call surveying today, recording sites throughout the canyon. It wasn't as systematic as what we would do today or want today, but it was a valuable effort. This is site 150. There's a different number for today. You can see it here in the foreground. It's not very clear, but it's a small pueblo, right? And one of the things about Chaco is that people really focus on the large sites. There are hundreds of smaller sites. There are a total of 4,000 documented sites, but there are at least hundreds of many small pueblos that are distributed throughout the park today. Another area of interest for UNM students at the time was the Navajo history through the archaeology of the canyon. And so some students were engaged in systematically or documenting many of the Navajo sites that were there, especially the student John Corbett. And this is an article that he published in 1940 for work that was done in summer of 1937. At the time, the Navajo families are living right next to the field camp, next to the field station. They're engaged in working with students, working for the projects. And so the students would attend Navajo gatherings on Sunday afternoons. And there was a really strong sense that what the field school should be doing, and Clyde Cluckham, an anthropologist that was a director one summer, encouraged this, was to be not just focused on the Puebloan occupation, but also on the Navajo part of that. These are some of the major figures in Southwestern anthropology and history that worked at the field school as directors or instructors. Clyde Cluckham, anthropologist from Harvard University, who was a director one summer. Donald Brand, who was a geographer, a cultural geographer at UNM, was a director one summer. Leslie Spear, archaeologist and ethnologist, was a director for a number of years. Marjorie Taylor Lambert was hired by the University of New Mexico in 1931 as a curator of archaeology in the Maxwell Museum and a lecturer in the anthropology department. I don't know that she's the first woman, female archaeologist hired into a university academic department, but I would not be surprised if she wasn't. In 1934, Florence Hawley Ellis, who received her BA and MA there in Tucson at the University of Arizona, and her PhD from the University of Chicago, a pioneer in dendrochronology, was hired by UNM as the first, I'm pretty sure this is true, the first tenure track female archaeologist in the United States. UNM has had a tenure track faculty member, female faculty member in archaeology continuously since 1931 or 34, and since 1931 in terms of lectures. So which is unusual. It has only been in the last, not in my generation, at which the sort of male, all white male sort of domination of academic departments has changed. Significantly, in many ways, Anna Shepard, that you see here, and Nick Postwhite here, was a ceramicist, and she worked initially for Neil Judd at Pueblo Bonito, and she came and told him that many of the ceramics, the sherds, the broken pieces of pottery, had temper material in it that was, or igneous, it didn't originate in Chaco. And so she was telling him that a large percentage of the pots in Chaco Canyon associated with Pueblo Bonito were made somewhere else and exchanged or traded or brought in. And he dismissed that. He didn't believe it. And he told her nicely, I guess, that she was wrong. She then went to work with Edgar Lee Hewitt and with the field school, including excavating her own small site. And Hewitt encouraged her in this understanding these ceramic, these origins of the ceramics, the sources, and what it might have to say about the role of Chaco in sort of a broader regional scale. So by 1940, this is what the area around Pueblo Bonito looks like. This is looking to the south. Pueblo Bonito is here. The rock over here that is going to fall in 1941 hasn't fallen yet. This is the Park Service complex, and a visitor center here where the cursor is, and over here we see a variety of buildings that were first built in the 1890s and early 20th century as part of a trading post, and then turned into sort of a small hotel and a variety of sort of private interests. It's falling down, it's falling apart, it's really in very poor shape. Right across the wash, or the floor of the canyon, is a state-of-the-art, brand new, modern research facility with those dormitories. The Park Service decided that they would actually like to move from here to over there, and that's what in 1939 initiated discussions between the university and the Park Service in terms of an exchange, is because the Park Service wanted to take over this and turn it into a visitor center, into a residential area for the park and headquarters and so on. So in 1949, that finally happened. UNM exchanged or deeded their property in the canyon to the National Park Service. 3 years later, in 1952, the National Park Service blew it all up. They blew it up literally. They dynamited all the buildings that were university buildings and then carted away all the stone and used it in other kinds of construction projects throughout the canyon. So that's kind of the end of the field school era in Chaco. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the park archaeologist will be Gordon Vivian, who was a UNM field school student. He was one in that 1931 photograph. His son, Gwen, who I'm sure many of you knew, he passed away recently, but worked for, his career was at the Arizona State Museum, went to UNM. He grew up in Albuquerque. He went to UNM as an undergraduate and did his master's work on Navajo archaeology in Chaco, went to the U of A and got his PhD, and became really one of the great figures in Chacoan archaeology. One of the most knowledgeable people around. This is one of the sites that he worked on as a graduate student, a Navajo site, one of the very early Navajo sites in the canyon. partly what his dad, Gordon, did in the park was complete excavations at the site of King Kletso. There was now it's Park Service property and as opposed to university property. And this is published in 1965. Right? So, all right. So that takes us into the 1960s. And in the 1960s, John Corbett, who is this former field school student who's now a National Park Service archaeologist, along with some other interested people in the Park Service, decided that research at Chaco Canyon needed to be upgraded, that not much had been done there, and that it needed to be upgraded in two ways. One, there needed to be a systematic survey of the entire park to find out just what was there. And it also needed to have a better visitor experience. And part of that visitor experience was envisioned as having series of sites that represented different points in time, much the way that there is sort of a trail of time at Mesa Verde where you can go see an early ceramic period site, and then you can see a later Pueblo 1 period site, and then a Pueblo 2 period, and a Pueblo 3 period, and so on. That didn't exist in Chaco, and so there was this idea of the Park Service would create a project that would do that, that would first inventory everything and then select sites for excavation that would then be part of an interpretive trail for visitors. This is a crew photograph from 1978. Some people that this is Jim Judge, who was the director of the project at that point. I show you this mostly to point out this individual here in the upper left-hand corner. This is Bill Gillespie, who is one of your board members and good friends, I'm sure. But the first director of this project was Robert Lister. You see on the left, Robert Lister was at the time a faculty member at the University of Colorado, but he had been at the field school in 1934 as a student. On the left is one of the first people he taught, right, is Tom Lyons, who was a PhD anthropologist, PhD in anthropology from UNM, but he was trained as a geologist. He received his PhD in 1969. The reason that Bob Lister was hired to come to UNM. One of the agreements, this Chaco project is a joint University of New Mexico National Park Service project from 1969 to 1984 that was housed and based on the campus at UNM. One of the arrangements was that the director of this project had to be a faculty member. Whoever it was had to be qualified to be a tenure track faculty member at the university. So Bob Lister came from the University of Colorado, took that job, hired Tom Lyons because Tom Lyons had a background in remote sensing, especially satellite and aerial photography. And Lister recognized that this would be potentially an important thing to bring to the project. The first field director that was hired was Al Hayes. You can see Al Hayes here. In the 1930s, he was a student at the University of New Mexico Field School in Chaco. He's the guy who's actually in charge of the field work, and one of the first people he hires is Tom Wines, who I'm sure many of you know, who was a student at UNM, a graduate student of Florence Ellis, who was one of the original sort of instructors at the field school in the 1930s. So it's a tremendous amount of continuity here from the 1930s into this project, which is starting up in the 1970s. That project, the original goal of the project, which was to create this sort of interpretive trail and inventory, shifted when Jim Judge was hired after Bob Lister after Al Hayes to run the field project. And the reason it shifted was because of the remote sensing work that Tom Lyons was doing as part of the Park Service's division of remote sensing, which was paired with the archaeological side of this Chaco project. And then one of the things that they were immediately drawn to was the site of Pueblo Alto, which is a great house up on the mesa above Pueblo Bonito and Chetracetl down the bottom. And these long linear features, which either converge on a very small hole or doorway in a wall by Pueblo Alto, or they diverge. They come out one way or the other. They gather right here. And Jim Judge convinced the Park Service that they should shift the focus from just doing interpretive archaeology for visitors to doing a research-based project that would investigate the relationship of these roads to the site and whether or not they might tell archaeologists and researchers more about what was going on in the canyon, sort of economically, social, politically, as opposed to just doing sort of a conventional trail through time kind of approach. So the remote sensing part started to drive some of the field work, and this is Pueblo Alto down in the lower portion, and this is generated from satellite imagery by NASA in the 1970s. They decided that since they had this remote sensing information, which is showing this relationship between this site and these linear features, that they would start excavations at Pueblo Alto with the idea of testing some ideas. Was it a gateway into the Chaco Canyon at the time? Did people have to come through this particular settlement before they were allowed to enter the canyon? But specifically, did this area, and this is where the roads come in, where the cursor is, did this area out to the east of the canyon, which is basically a very large plaza or courtyard sort of area, was that potentially a marketplace? In other words, were people potentially coming into this area and trading or exchanging? Remember, Anna Shepard had shown that a tremendous amount or a large number of ceramics were coming in. Could this be sort of a trading center? And so that was a question that drove the sort of excavations. It turned out that the idea, the hypothesis, it couldn't be confirmed or not confirmed. The data just didn't seem to reflect a market kind of pattern in that area. But there was this very large scale excavation, although only about 16% of the site was excavated, and there was a focus here on clusters of rooms that might be suites, household sorts of suites. One of the things that did was generate lots and lots of artifacts, and as it turned out, the project had not been prepared for those large numbers of artifacts. And through the 1980s and 1990s, the Park Service grappled with what to do with all the material. It was piling up in a large storage room in the anthropology building at UNM. Eventually, in the 1990s, Congress and the Park Service and the university managed to collaboratively create a collection center, an archive on the campus of UNM, in which they would also bring together not just the materials from the Chaco project, but from all Park Service materials and information that was related to Chaco Canyon to this one place. And so now this is one of the major research centers in the United States for Chaco Canyon archaeology. This is former curator Dr. Wendy Bustard, who received her PhD at Chaco UNM doing research on spatial organization of Chaco and great houses. Okay, so that's the end of part one. Part two starts in 2005 when the Park Service granted a research permit to us to several of us here at UNM to reopen, that is, re-excavate archaeological trenches that had been dug at Pueblo Bonito in the 1920s by the National Geographic Society. And this is where they are located. This is Pueblo Bonito, and if you've been there, you probably don't realize how complicated the architecture is actually around this building. It's occupied for several hundred years, or it's built and rebuilt and over generations. Out in front, on the south side, are two very large earthen features that are comprised mostly of construction debris, artifacts, ash, and charcoal from the occupation of the site. Starting in 1896, and maybe before then, people started putting holes in this looking for human burials. No human burials have ever been recovered from these mounds or some of the other large mounds in the park, except for possibly one over at Chetrakettle. The National Geographic Society put a very large trench right through the middle of this one, a very large trench in between the two mounds, and a very large trench through here. So we requested permission to reopen, not to dig a new excavation, but to reopen, because a geologist named Kurt Bryan, who had looked at the stratigraphic profiles of these trenches when they were open in 1924 and 1925, had identified a number of water channels, very large water channels. They were obvious deep underneath these mounds. But he didn't really do anything with it, and Neil Judd, who was the director of the project, wasn't apparently terribly interested in them. They were more interested in the contents of the mounds or the architecture at Pueblo Bonillo itself. So we requested permission to reopen that, to put together a team of scientists who could come in and look at the geological context, the archaeological context. And we recruited, actually, researchers who had been working in your part of the world, in Tucson and Phoenix, on Hohokam irrigation canals, because we wanted people who had experience with these kinds of features to be part of this. I also show you a feature over here. This is a Wetherill well. This is the location of the Richard Wetherill trading post. And there's a historic well here that was excavated around 1900 to 1901. And that's part of what I'm going to show you here in a minute as well. But anyway, so this is in 2007. We've opened these up. They are now backfilled. That's why they're covered up again. This one still has tarps over it because it has not yet been closed. So this is the East Mound in 1924. This is the top of the mound. It's a step trench, so you dig down. It's pretty wide at the top, and then it gets narrow as you get into the lower sections. This is in the same section of the mound in 2006 when we've reopened it. And you can see a couple of things here right away. This lower section, it corresponds to the section that you see here. So you can see a whole lot of what used to be on top of this is gone. And it's gone for a variety of reasons that have to do with the sort of the Park Service having a visitor center in this area for a while. And it's a long story. But basically, we're able to get down into the lower sections, that is sort of below most of the tops of the mounds, where these channels had been originally identified. And this is the group of geologist David Love, Susan Smith, who's a palynologist, Manuel Palacios Fest, and Karen Adams. I'm sure many of you know them from work here. Wynn Vivian, who you see up here, who was the consultant for us in the beginning phases of this project. Some of these sections are quite deep. This is in the middle trench. And again, this is Dave Love down here. This is Karen Adams. We would never get away with this today. OSHA wouldn't allow it. And I'm surprised the Park Service allowed us to get this deep into re-excavating this. But this turned out to be very important. And I'll tell you why here in just a minute, because it tells us something about something that happened in the past that was important. So we get down into these sections and open them up, and we are easily able to identify these channels. These are repeated flows in the channels, and they're interesting because the lower one and the upper one are fairly violent flash floods which go through, and then there are these more gentle flows which are in between. The flash floods are inconsistent with irrigation canals. They are much more consistent with sort of diversion canals or channels which are being used to divert water around or past something rather than into sort of, say, agricultural fields. At any rate, these are quite large. They're about 10 meters. You actually can't see all of it in this one, wide. And they have a series of what geologists would call a cut and fill sequence. That is, there's an original channel, and then it fills in a little bit, and then there's a new set of flows which come through and sort of gouge it out, and then they fill in, and then there's another one over here on the right. These are artificially excavated in construction, partly because we know that because we see artificially constructed banks. And I'm not going to bore you with those details, but I'll show you what this looks like in terms of matching up the different profiles from different trenches. This is the East Mound on this side. This is the West Mound. And you can see these are the banks that are constructed. There was never any blue water here, but we use blue to show where the water channel would be. And so this is a big feature. This is really a sort of a massive construction, and we think it is designed to let water, control water passing past Pueblo Bonillo and pushing that water out to the western part area past the site. This is the mound, the top of the mound here. So you can see how in the top of the mound here. So you can see the mounds form after these channels have been built. And so they're no longer in use when those mounds are constructed or accumulate. In 2007, the Park Service asked us, since we were already out there, to take a look in the Wetherill Trading Post area because there was some erosion. There was a hole that showed up. It's right here. Again, the short story here is over a series of seasons of excavations in the fall, we identified this historic period well. And the Park Service really didn't know what to do with it. We didn't know what to do with it. They kept telling us to excavate it. It's full of historic artifacts that are associated with the early trading post. Eventually, the Park Service asked us to remove the well, the stone lining of the well, and as much as we could, we got down, as you can see, a couple of meters and decided it just really wasn't worth it or safe anymore. But this is the serendipity that happens sometimes in field work. This historic period excavation that created this well and then dug down penetrated through the side of a canal. So this is out to the west of Pueblo Bonito. I'll show you it's located right here. And so this allowed us, we looked at the profile, what we could see of it. It's pretty almost identical. Here it matches up in terms of a small grade from here to there. There's another profile out here to the east that is similar in terms of size and construction. And so we think that this is, we're guessing at these intervening areas, but this is a large canal which ran through here and out here. It was built late in the occupation of Pueblo Bonito, but before these mounds formed. That canal, and this is with the real value in having gone back in and reopened these trenches, we think. This is the original canal line. At some point, a natural erosional channel called the Bonito Paleo Channel, a very large one, similar to the arroyo that's in the canyon today, cut into the edge of this canal and destroyed it. And we have the profiles for that event in the middle trench. Then apparently a second canal that may or may not have been linked up here, we don't know, but we're hypothesizing here, was built closer to Pueblo Bonito, but never really worked very well. We have the construction of the canal, but there really there's not much evidence for sort of the flows that we would expect. But this is a big event because this channel that cut into this canal created a large erosional, an entrenched erosional feature in the middle of the floodplain of the canyon while this building is still under construction in the later sort of phases. This is the geologist Kirk Bryan who originally identified this erosional channel in 1924 out in on the floodplain where it was eroded by the modern arroyo. Okay. We between 2011 and 2005 and 2011 and some subsequent years, relocated sections of this natural arroyo, which formed, and we now know pretty well, around 1100 AD, out in the main wash. And because we had field school students there, we were able to do something that geologists really don't like to do, which is to profile an area in this section, 70 meters of the profile of the arroyo face. Normally a geologist, they don't have the time or that we'll just do a section here, a section there. We wanted to see the whole thing. And so this is what it essentially looks like. So what's happening here, we imagine, is that the natural erosional channel arroyo, which is this is the modern one that you see sort of wiggling around down here, formed and came in and got very close to Pueblo Bonito around 1100 AD. It cut through this and destroyed a section of this artificial canal. They attempted to move it this way, but that doesn't seem to have worked. And subsequently, these mounds formed over it. We found the Park Service excavated some areas out here in 1982, which match up with the profiles that we have here and here. So we're guessing that somewhere through this area out to the west of Pueblo Bonito, this canal probably continued. So that's one of the goal was to find out what these channels could tell us about the occupation and history of Pueblo Bonito, and it continues to provide us with some interesting information. Our projects have been a mixture of sort of straight researchers, professionals, and a fall field school that we are able to do during a fall semester. It's complicated, but we're able to do it. And so we have been, students have been engaged in that. We've had over 150 students participate. The Park Service has provided us with places to camp, which are nice because you get the night sky effect, but they're not like the field station that the university had in the 1930s. There's some small compensation occasionally. The Park Service did give us one of the nicest porta potties that you can possibly imagine, that we're glad to have. One of the things that we have been engaged in is a straight line continuity with the remote sensing division work of the National Park Service in the 1970s and 80s. And that is applying modern, sort of more up-to-date remote sensing methods for addressing certain kinds of issues and questions that interest people. In this case, this is a GPS base station, which gives us sub-centimeter accuracy on surface or whatever elevations that we might want to take. This is important, not because we need to know that a site is within a certain centimeter or something, but it ties in with a second kind of remote sensing that was pioneered in Chaco in the 1970s called ground penetrating radar. And this is a 1970s version at Chaco in the plaza at Pueblo Bonito, pulling this radar unit across the surface. It just sends, but it sends a signal down, it bounces back, and it tells you, once it's interpreted, what kinds of features might be below the surface. So this is one of our former graduate students now, Dr. Jenny Sturm, who's an expert in this kind of remote sensing. And this is our version of a ground penetrating radar unit. And she actually has her computer on her, strapped to her front so that she's seeing what she's doing as she's moving along. This is where the GPS base station becomes important, because that's tied in directly to this as she's doing this, so that we're getting an exact surface measurement that goes with an exact subsurface signal. She's been used this as part of her dissertation to explore a hypothesized agricultural field systems in Chaco. This is one that you can that is a series of gridded patterns near the site of Chetrakettle. You drive over it today when you're on the paved road. You can see it in some early 20th century photographs. The problem here is it's not clear that it's an agricultural feature or that it's prehistoric. But Jenny's work, this is Chetrakettle, this is the area that she did her remote sensing work, shows that below these grids, so otherwise this is what you see on the surface, but below what you see on the surface is a real welter of other kinds of linear features, including probably some pit house sites and small pueblos that are out in this part that don't show up on the surface. The reason they don't show up on the surface partly is because after that paleo channel filled in around 1100 AD, it started to flood the canyon again. So many of the features that were part of the occupation in the 1100s, even the 1200s, are buried. You can't see them on the ground. We see them either through remote sensing or through exposures in the arroyo today. One of the things that we brought into this work immediately was LiDAR, LiDAR-based three-dimensional recording of surfaces by sending out a laser pulse, which is then coming back. And this became really important for us in these trenches. This is the middle trench because these are very narrow, and it's very hard to get into them, to do photography, to do recording. And so the LiDAR provides us with a three-dimensional, extremely accurate three-dimensional model or a representation of this trench that we can then superimpose drawings or photographs or other materials on it. This is the East Trench. This is a LiDAR unit looking at this really messy excavate. We didn't do this. This is the way we found it. And this is the LiDAR representation of that. Now, once we have that model, we can rotate it, we can turn it upside down, we can turn it inside out, we can work with it analytically. LiDAR is not a method for finding things underneath the surface. That's sort of a misapprehension that we sometimes run into. It is a way of recording surface elevations. And it's great for visualization. This is Pueblo Bonito over here, based on LiDAR, airborne LiDAR that we obtained as part of early phases of our project. This is what it looks like in Google Earth. You can immediately see elevational differences on the tops of the mesas and so on. So it's kind of cool. It gives you kind of cool pictures. There's Pueblo del Arroyo, Pueblo Bonito, Pueblo or Chetra, and you can use it in these sort of visualization ways to say, well, you know, elevation's quite higher on the sort of South Mesas, and maybe you can see over here, maybe you can't see over there. We're more interested in less in the sort of the visual presentation as how we can use that analytically to address certain kinds of issues. So here's a LiDAR-based model up at Pueblo Alto. This is Pueblo Alto here, New Alto over here, Rabbit Ruin. These are two buildings which are built in the 1100s AD. This gives us a really close-up view of the surface topography, and in GIS environments, we can create what are called flow models. And so these colors that you see are surface channels where water is flowing. And this confirms something that we observed in the field in 2010, doing some work around these sites. You can slightly see maybe some sort of arc here, a little bit of raised topography. These channels go right into what are low berms. And these low berms are collecting water, which is coming off the surface here. It's flowing to the north, down slope. And in each of these little gaps, there is a little head gate, a little sort of stone box, which could stop the water. So these are hard. You can see them on the ground, sort of, but the model here allows us to actually estimate or to calculate how much area and so how much water might actually flow into these zones. So that's where this sort of where LiDAR-based sort of topography models become important for us. They become the foundation for answering some other questions. One of the other issues that we've been interested in is agricultural suitability model. This builds directly on work in Chaco during the Chaco project, in which Bill Gillespie was involved, in Wolcott Tull and some other archaeologists, where they were doing experimental agriculture and trying to see what kinds of places in the canyon might have been suitable for agriculture. This is a model that was produced using LiDAR and GIS in 2012 by Weatherby Dorshow, Dr. Weatherby Dorshow, one of our former grad students now, integrating a lot of the sort of variables that are important for farmers to create a model, a spatial model showing where the best farming areas might be. And you can see this is the boundaries of the park. This is just what archaeologists sometimes call the core area, or downtown Chaco. Pueblo Bonito is over here. And you can see the green shows you where the best farming areas are, and it includes areas which are up on top of the mesas. And so this is one of the ways in which we can look at the correlation or the association between potentially good agricultural land and the distribution of farming settlements. Last year, or 2 years ago, we upgraded that study to include the entire Chacoan Basin, almost 4,000 square kilometers. You see the park boundaries down here. All the little black dots are archaeological sites. Again, the green areas are your primary potential agricultural areas. This includes new, we added, I think, 10 more variables into this sort of model. And one of the things that is pretty clear is that even though these areas haven't been as well surveyed, is that Chaco Canyon and these little tributary drainages are the best places to be in this area if you are a maize-based low-level agriculturalist, right? Weatherby graduated in 2012, received this. Esri, as you probably know, those of you who do GIS work, is the producer of ArcGIS software. Received an award in 2016 for his work here and for other places in innovative applications of GIS and other kinds of remote sensing to interesting sorts of questions. Some of you may have heard of work that Patty Crown, who graduated from the University of Arizona and worked here for many years in Tucson, an old friend, I'm sure, for many of you, did in 2013. That is a re-excavation of room 28 in Pueblo Bonito, which she refers to as the House of the Cylinder Jars, because of these cylinder jars that were found mostly in Pueblo Bonito and mostly in room 28. And I'm not going to talk about her work. You can invite her to, and maybe you've heard her talks on the cylinder jars. She, along with collaborators at the Hershey Corporation in Pennsylvania, did residue analysis on the interiors of some of these jars, or sherds from some of these jars, and discovered that they contain cacao or chocolate residue. And she posits that this is being consumed as a beverage. This is one of the interesting parts about this is a re-excavation, is that Patty wasn't allowed to sample these cylinder jars. Instead, because it involves a small destructive aspect, she instead was able to sample fragment or sherds of cylinder jars that came out of the re-excavation of those trenches. So the sherds that that were used for identifying chocolate in these jars came from the re-excavation of those trenches from the back dirt that had been excavated in the 1920s and then thrown back in. So the value in sort of returning not just to collections that are in museums, where they sometimes won't let you do anything, but actually looking at materials from back dirt as a source of really important information. So this is the excavation of room 28 on the left, a closely collaborative project with the National Park Service. On the right, this is Jackie Koser, one of our graduate students who's about to finish. She's from Tesuque and Taos Pueblos. And Jackie represents an important part of our mission at UNM, as do many of the other Indigenous students who have been part of this work all along. This is James Gachapin from Jemez Pueblo on the left, Jeremy Begay, who's Navajo Dene on the right. All of our projects in Chaco have involved multiple Indigenous students, many of them as supervisors or graduate students. Our mission at UNM, as in any university, is education, just like Edgar Lee Hewitt envisioned that it should be. And our job with Native American students is to engage with the issues that they bring to becoming professional archaeologists. But ultimately, we're just in the business of training in best practices. What students do with that as they go forward is what they do with it. We're not here to tell people, our graduate students, how they should pursue their research or what they should bring to their research once we have trained them. So Ed Jolie, who I'm sure many of you know, Associate Professor of Anthropology and Associate Curator of Ethnology at the Arizona State Museum in Tucson, was our field sort of assistant, #1 guy, the first 2 summers, 2005, 2006. You see Ed over here in the West Trench, or the East Trench rather. And if you haven't met Ed, you should go talk to him. The one on the left here, Ed, you may know, is involved with the new discovery of human footprints at White Sands National Park, which may date to 20 to 23,000 years ago. So just incredibly important work. One of our undergraduates from UNM, who has gone on now to a stellar career in archaeology and anthropology, Joseph Aguilar, Woody. You see Woody here as a student in 2006 in the field in Chaco. Woody then went from UNM to the University of Pennsylvania, where he received his PhD. And then in the process of getting that, became a Weatherhead, or rather Le Mans scholar at the School of American Research, now the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe. So there's a really nice, for us, I think, coming around here. Edgar Lee Hewitt established SAR as a research center and engaged SAR with Chacoan research as an educational training experience. And Woody, who got his start in archaeology working with us, in Chaco, is now Woody is from San Ildefonso Pueblo, and he is their associate tribal historic preservation officer. And Eggerly Hewitt, I am sure, would have really thought that was great. These are places, not all of them, but many of the indigenous places where some of our students have come from. UNM is a majority university. Approximately 8 to 10% of our students, depending on semester, are Native American students. And so our mission at UNM is to get those students the training that will help them do what they want to do with their careers in the ways they want to do it, and bring to those efforts their own backgrounds, their own experiences, to ask the questions that they want to ask, and to apply archaeological methods where appropriate to answer them. Okay, so I want to thank you. That's it for me tonight, for letting me be here. And again, I especially want to thank all the many students who have worked with us in Chaco, and all the ones that have worked there since 1929. So.
Chip, can you hear me? This is Butch speaking out of the darkness. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I totally went too long.
No. And as a non-archaeologist, I very much appreciate the history that you've given tonight. And UNM and all the people that were there have a rich history and legacy that you ought to be proud of. My one question, and I'll get to some other questions, but that group photo that had Bill Gillespie in it from, I think, 1978 or so, were you in that as well?
Yeah, I can go. Take me a while here, but I really apologize for how long this went, but I get bogged down in the history because it's so interesting. And not that many people know about it.
Well, I thought it was particularly, I thought it was great, personally.
All right, so I can tell you the people that you probably know, some of you, maybe you didn't know them in their younger incarnations. This is Steve Lexon on Bill's right. This is me on his left.
Oh, yeah.
This is Peter McKenna in the front, Tom Wines, Marcia Truel, Jim Judge, Wolke, Tull here, Corey Bredernitz. Bredernitz and Tucson go together. Bob Powers here in the middle, and various other folks.
Well, thank you. I have a question from Jonathan Sandor.
John Sandor, yes.
Sandor, what's the purpose of the canal that you mentioned early on?
Okay, so we'll go back to that one too. Hello, John. So what we're thinking here is that this, if I can get a better view of it, is that it's not for irrigation. It's a diversion canal or channel that is capturing water, which is coming from upstream off the floodplain and from the cliffs above, and pushing it past Pueblo Bonito. Now, what happens out here and is another story. We know from excavations in the Wetherell area that this is a pretty marshy, kind of swampy area, and it was from 700 AD up until around 1000 or so. It's a low-lying area that collects water. There's lots of cattail pollen in the excavation areas and in Pueblo Bonito. But the flows which come through here are, for the most part, really high velocity flows. They rip up materials from other areas. We have artifacts that are in different parts of this sort of trench that match up with artifacts which came from the mounds. So pretty destructive. So the working hypothesis is that they're not irrigation in the sense of agricultural irrigation, but they are more engineering infrastructure to protect the building. Pueblo Bonito is the only great house which is situated on the floodplain in a way that it can flood. And there are flood deposits which are in some of the rooms, particularly on the south side of the building. The other great houses are all, except for Pueblo del Arroyo over here, are all perched up slightly above the active floodplain. So I don't know if that answers John's question, but but that's what we think, that rather than irrigation agriculture, that it's water control in the engineering sense.
Yeah, thank you. I think much to your credit, obviously to your credit, most of these comments are actually thank yous. Janet Lloyd is saying, great presentation. Thank you very much. Important to seeing your goals. Marilyn Guida, I think it is, fabulous presentation, a wonderful perspective on the evolution of archaeology, as well as the dedicated people who followed and are following there. Thank you. Judy Schaefer, marvelous. I enjoyed this presentation so much. Thank you. Cynthia Love, truly fascinating. Again, thank you. Audrey Espinoza, thank you so much for that amazing history. It was very revealing. Love seeing some of these well-known figures in their youth. Sharon Strachan, thanks for this rich history of the archaeological experience that teaches us about Chaco. Again, Joe Oglesby, very interesting presentation. I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you. And Carol Farnsworth, great to learn some of the history of the research. And then I think Paula Lozar, fascinating. I volunteered for New Mexico Site Watch at Chaco from 2012 to 2019. And I'm amazed at how much is still being discovered about this site. So we have all those kudos and things. Maybe Alice got a question that I haven't seen, but I haven't seen one.
Yeah, we actually have one from Bill Doolittle here. If the canal carried runoff from the mesa top, why didn't they just let the canal terminate in the eroded main channel?
Okay, so hi, Bill. So what Bill's wondering is why didn't they just let the pretty upstream, let the water just go out into this channel? I could show you a hydrological model, again, a GIS-based model for this sort of area. There's a lot of runoff which comes down off the cliffs and sort of collects along in here. This Kirk Bryan, the geologist who originally sort of identified these channels, thought that they probably were collecting water as far as upstream as Chetrakettle, which has a major sort of area that water runs off the mesa, and bringing it down this way. I think, and this goes to maybe John Sandor's question as well, I think they want this water for construction purposes. These buildings are approximately, and this is again based on Gwen Vivian's work, the construction of the building itself involves about 40% by volume water in the construction of mortar and plasters and foundations and so on. And and I didn't show you because I knew this was going to take too much time, but the point at which this canal is interrupted by this natural erosional channel out here is exactly the point at which tree ring dating for this building stops. In other words, the chronological record of construction stops. And it's not as tight as I know a lot of people would like, but it's pretty clear that what happens here is that once this channel gets this close, the construction at Pueblo Bonito seems to stall. And a working hypothesis is that the water that would have been channeled through here and brought over maybe into this low-lying area here for construction purposes is now doing what I think Bill just asked, which is now flowing directly into this channel and is being lost downstream. If that's what's going on, then it's the longer story is that probably the reason that this natural channel forms in the first place is excessive water. That this is what climatologists refer to as a pluvial period in this part of the Southwest. An excessive amount of water is required to generate, as you guys know in the Tucson area and in the Hocom archaeological record, big natural arroyos form because of excessive flooding. Now, whether it's flooding because it's just really too wet, or whether it's flooding because it's really dry and the flood and you have a lot of rainfall, you need flooding to create these kinds of arroyos. And so there's a possibility here that ironically, and again, I'm not saying it's true, but ironically, too much water may have created an erosional feature, which leads to the termination of construction because water is now being lost, surface water is now being lost into this entrenched channel in the main part of the canyon. So I don't, we floated this idea in publications recently, not as a conclusion, but as a encouragement to maybe look at what's happening here in a slightly different way. Partly because if you have excessive rainfall or excessive precipitation or massive flooding events, they can create a problem in terms of access to water here, but they might be good for farming. If farming is occurring in sort of other areas. And we don't really think there's much farming probably going on in the middle part of the floodplain anyway, because of these issues about potentially catastrophic flooding. So again, I'm sorry for such a long answer, but it's a work in progress. And I would hate to think that anyone would come away thinking that we had just put a name on this and said that it's a diversion canal and whatever. It's still, we're working with old data, new data from old context. We would love to be able to generate new data from new context to test these sorts of hypotheses. Whether the Park Service would allow that or not, we don't know. It takes a long time to get permission to do anything. I think when Patty did her work in room 28, it took 4 years writing permits and going through consultations and so on before she could do that work. It took us 3 years for this project.
Well, thank you for Bill's clarification to Bill's question. Libby Beck has asked, now that slide is still there, and do you consider the mounds as levees?
Do I consider the mounds what?
As levees?
Levees. Maybe. I think that's a real possibility. That because when this channel, before and after it fills in again, it fills in fairly quickly. Flood deposits bank up against the sides of the mounds. And Kirk Bryan knew that in the 1920s, and we can affirm that is correct, that these could be essentially berms that prevent low line or floodplain floods from extending all the way over up against the building. I know that many people see these mounds as more as sort of ritual structures or architectural structures for other purposes, which they could be used for. But I think that initially they're deliberately filling in these channels and building banks out against the floodplain. So I think that's a good question, and I think it makes sense.
Thank you, Chip. Al Webster has asked the question, will you be running another field school this summer?
Not this summer. We were just talking with the Park Service last week about next summer, but I don't think it'll involve what I would like to do, which is to go back in, and that's another probably 3 years of diplomacy and negotiation to try to sort of test these ideas. So the answer is almost certainly no.
Okay, well, thank you.
But if we do, we'll send you guys an email and say, come visit.
So Libby has asked a question or made a statement, which I don't know about, but it says that Libby Beck is saying at least not marigold gardens. And I don't know what that means, but you probably do.
Well, I think that was following up on her question about the mounds as levees.
Okay.
So what was the follow-up question or comment?
Just it says at least not marigold gardens.
No, but actually, these mounds are really sort of disturbed. They're not soils, but they are a disturbed environment for plants. If you see that when you go out there today, at Pueblo Alto, which is up on the top, has a very large mound, which is definitely not a berm or embankment or something, but it has really high densities of bee weed, which is, as you know, used for painting pots in some cases, or textiles, dyeing textiles, much more so than we would expect in a natural sort of ecological setting. And so it's possible that these mounds create environments in which wild plants do flourish. So it's and if you've ever been in Chaco in the late summer, early fall, when the sunflowers are out, you know, the entire canyon, tributary canyons, can be covered in sunflowers, just naturally.
Okay, well, thank you.
Mm.
Well, I think unless Al has seen something I haven't, maybe we've run out of questions at least.
Well, there's just one more comment in the chat from Joe Oglesby. He said, "You're doing good work and headed in the right in a good direction."
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to try to sum this all up and just say that all of you guys, and particularly University of New Mexico, really has added considerably to the archaeological history of the region. You guys should be very proud of what you're accomplishing. Do you have any last comments you might want to throw in here, Chip, before we adjourn?
No, I really don't. Again, I appreciate the invitation to be here. I heard you say that Pat Gilman might have been in on this, and she's another UNM PhD. So you've got a lot of them down there in the paradise.
I'm a UNM grad too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I got my BA there.
What year?
73.
Huh.
Dating myself.
Yeah, you did. I can count. Well, congratulations to you too.
Thanks. Well, I very much appreciate it, Chip. Excellent talk, and I don't mind that you went a little over what you intended.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Well, those who weren't interested didn't have to stay anyway, I suppose.
Okay.
Well, okay. So Dr. Wills, Chip, on behalf of this group and the Old Pueblo Archaeology Center, I very much want to thank you for your presentation. I certainly learned a lot. I like this kind of history. And want to thank all the audience that showed up tonight. And I think originally we had 175 or so registered, which is a pretty good turnout. And then lastly, keep in mind about the donations. On the question and answer place, Al has written in where you can send money, donate, and other ways to contact Old Pueblo Archaeology. So, and it does, the donations do cover the expenses and, the kids coming out there and what have you. It's a good contribution on your part. So I guess other than maybe any last comments that Al might like to have, I'm gonna maybe just say goodbye and good night. How's that sound?
There is one more entry in the Q&A from Dave Siegel here. He said, Gwen Vivian concluded that, quote, "In the end, there have been new definitive answers to the most intriguing questions about Chaco. For the present, the mystery of Chaco remains just that, a mystery." And he asked, do you see it that way, Chip?
Yeah, and I'm probably going to channel Steve Lexon here. The mystery might be why archaeologists think it's a mystery, but we know a lot, and the history in some sort of basic ways seems pretty straightforward. I think what researchers don't understand is why it happened. I mean, the sort of the what happened and when it happened is not that mysterious. But like most things in archaeology that do seem mysterious, it's like, why build a Stonehenge when you built it in the place that you built it? Why Chaco Canyon, which doesn't seem like an ideal place for farmers to throw so much effort and labor and time and energy into these projects that are unprecedented. There's no precedent for them. And so it's something that's very new that's happening, something that's innovative, and it's challenging, I think, for archaeologists to move past simply describing what happened in the order in which it happened to understanding that why it happened, why certain things occurred in the way that they did. So we are finding out lots of still finding out or discovering new things that we didn't know, but I think, yes, it's still mysterious in the sense of there's no clear explanation for why in the 1000s AD there's this explosion of creativity and new kinds of social forms. There are a lot of ideas, but those ideas require testing, and it's a sort of crude scientific way. You can have ideas, but if you can't evaluate them and then move forward from those ideas to refine sort of the questions that you're asking, then you kind of will be stuck, I think. So, and you know, Gwen was brilliant. His insights about Chaco were just you know, are still fabulous.
Yeah, Dave followed up, said few definitive answers. A couple of you have asked in the chat, will this talk be recorded? And the answer is yes. We will have it on Old Pueblo Archaeology Center's YouTube channel, hopefully by this weekend.
Al, to that point, how many other programs are on that channel? Do you know?
Oh, we started in the second half of COVID, so probably in the fall of 2020. And we've recorded the majority of our Third Thursday talks and some of our Indigenous interest talks. It's another series that we've done. So there's probably at least 20, maybe more than that. I haven't counted them lately. Quite a few videos on our YouTube channel, so please check them out.
Well, it's a great source to go back and refresh your memory on some things as well. Well, again, thank you, Chip, for such a great program. And maybe we can have you back in the future sometime also.
Okay, if I live that long, but thank you.
After you get the NPS authority to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you. And good night, everybody.
Thanks, Chip. Thanks, Butch. Thanks to everybody.